In the very first Persona 6 teaser, Atlus revealed way too much. At first glance, it looks like a random sequence of nonsensical abstract images stitched together just to set a mood. But those 60 seconds hide far more than you think. So, we're going to deconstruct this teaser frame by frame to extract the hidden clues about the story, the mechanics, and even the characters. The teaser opens up with a gloomy, rain-heavy night at the graveyard, immediately establishing a tone that feels vastly different from Persona 5, and I'm loving it. As the scene plays out, the camera dollies in towards an elevated statue depicting a headless person. We can make out the legs, a quote, what seems to be a belt, and a pendant shaped like a hook. If you look closely at the heavily degraded statue, you can spot the number 6 carved into the left side, a clear nod to the series' progression. Below it, there's a plaque and a stone curb, both covered in unreadable text. It looks like an abandoned, vandalized site, the perfect hangout for angsty teenagers. However, there's a deeper layer here. The way these images are processed tells a completely different story. Notice how every frame is heavily textured with noise and film grain? When an analog camera records in ultra-low light environment, it creates a thick layer of static across the dark areas. The bright green sky creates dark silhouettes of the trees, and objects too close to the lens suffer from an intense whiteout effect. These are the classic visual traits of an infrared night vision camera. Because of this, the scene likely isn't trying to pitch Persona 6 as a horror game. Instead, it looks like someone is actively filming a ghost hunting vlog or a documentary exploring local haunted ruins. And at the very end, we see the shadow of someone in a raincoat reaching towards the base of the statue, as if trying to brush off the dirt to see who it belonged to. Who is filming this? But before getting an answer, the video cuts out to a rapid-fire sequence of abstract images. It is a completely shift in presentation style, but if we pause and go frame by frame, the reason for this shift becomes clear. The footage is heavily degraded. We see light leaks, film burns, analog scratches, and chromatic highlights. We have shifted from moving video to still photography. This is the kind of analog damage that happens when a vintage lens refracts light under extreme conditions, like the lingering humidity and moisture right after a heavy rain. But what exactly are we looking at? What are these weird, stringy red and green shapes? My money is on flowers that grow around graveyards. Red spider lilies. They look like this because they've been color inverted into neon green with a radioactive red outline through a process called solarization. This occurs when a film print is exposed to light during the chemical development process. In Japanese culture, the spider lily is the definitive flower of death. They are said to bloom only on the path to the underworld, marking the boundary between the living and the dead. By showcasing them through an inverted, solarized macro lens, Atlus is visually confirming that our camera has just crossed into the border zone, the in-between life and death. All of this is starting to paint a clear picture of what is actually going on. Once is a stylistic choice, but twice is a pattern. These are the fingerprints of a creator with specific artistic sensibilities, someone using specialized tools to tell a story, perhaps an investigator or a visual artist. Think about the progression here. We moved from a dynamic visual medium to a static one, from inorganic objects to organic life, and from wide perspectives to macro focus. And when you view the teaser through this specific lens, the next sequence makes a lot more sense, because in the next few frames, the scale shrinks even further. We move from the macro to the microscopic, diving deep into a world that is no longer visible to the naked eye. Notice those dark organic circles in the background? They look exactly like cellular structures, photographed through a microscope lens. Following the logic that spider lilies grow near bodies of water, it makes sense that we are looking at water from a stagnant pond inside the cemetery. While one could argue that this is ectoplasm or some sort of supernatural residue, the serious roots in Jungian psychology makes me think of a more psychological answer. In Jungian theory, water represents the unconscious mind, a strong callback to Philemon and the blue butterfly. Clean, open water represents a calm, balanced mind, but here we're dealing with murky, stagnant water. This represents the deep, hidden and forgotten parts of the psyche, the exact places where the trauma and repressed feelings take root. Factoring in the flowers and the visual subtext, this specific unconscious mind might be completely corrupted. Then there are the red strings. Your first instinct might be to call them the red strings of fate, but given the microscopic cellular environment we are looking at, I'm going to challenge that assumption. In previous games, the bond between a human and their persona was strictly spiritual or psychological, but here, looking at these organic, merging lines, I think these bonds are biological. If these strings are merging, we might be looking at a physical, biological symbiosis. Summoning a persona in this game might be a visceral, physical transformation. When you step back, what becomes clear is a shift in tools. First, an infrared video camera. Then, an analog photography camera. Now, a microscope. This wasn't produced by a single person. It feels like a collaboration of different methods. This is a crew. Each of these gadgets likely belongs to a different member of our new cast. However, the most interesting shift occurs in the final frame. The film roll shifts into a much older, tactile medium, visual collage. The composition of this blurry, almost spectral silhouette is clearly deliberate. By placing the figure in front of a light source, it strips away individual identity, making it impossible to tell if we are looking at a crew member, an apparition, or something in between. Because of that backlighting, this figure becomes a total enigma, and that mystery is only amplified with the use of mismatched facial features. A pair of eyes, a nose here, a mouth there, like they were clipped from old magazines. It creates a ransom note aesthetic. It feels less like a portrait and more like a construction, an attempt to assemble an identity from human parts instead of stylized letters. And when the silhouette finally disappears, and only the disjointed facial features remain, this is where we enter into cubist abstraction, breaking down the subjects into components and reassembling them into a way that reflects a fragmented reality. This isn't a physical dissection though, just a symbolical search for the subject's true identity. Who are they? It's unsettling, and fits with the distorted reality theme that's been alluded to. Ultimately, this mirrors a core theme of the Persona series, navigating the raw angst, often grotesque reality of adolescence. So, it makes perfect sense that one of our crew members is a visual artist, someone processing the bizarre, grotesque things they are investigating through visceral, mixed media art. Using this ransom note aesthetic to piece together a fragmented identity feels incredibly raw, punk, and highly expressive, and that hands-on tactile approach becomes undeniably clear the moment the film roll moves away from the image and begins to show us the actual creative process, because sometimes documenting the process is just as important as the final product. By adding another dimension, we are moving away from a flat 2D plane and stepping into a physical 3D space. Welcome to the Darkroom. If you look closely, you'll notice that while certain elements of physical damage remain constant across several frames, only the background moves. We aren't just looking at a sequence of images anymore. Instead, we are witnessing a continuous sequence of a chemical process taking place in real time. We see a macro view of fluid droplets hitting an original photo. Then, a slight zoom out reveals the final result, the image and its chemical bleeding patterns sliced into vertical strips. This look is likely achieved through a chemical emulsion, which explains the organic way the colors bleed, creating that watercolor effect. Those vertical slices point directly to a surrealist collage method known as the cut-up technique, originally used to break linear narratives and reveal hidden subconscious meanings. It is being applied here visually. By slicing the image and rearranging it, the original story is destroyed to reveal something deeper. It is an incredibly fitting theme for a Persona game. Based on the color palette and the underlying themes, I believe this original photograph, before it was sliced and distorted, is actually the blue butterfly we see later in the trailer, seeing it in its pure state before it's broken by the process. This documentation of the process serves as the vital bridge between the previous scene and what comes next. If the ransom note aesthetic was only an illusion until this point, we are about to dive fully into it by stitching together several scattered frames, while skipping others. It is better this way, because the next sequences are so heavily connected to this one that it makes more sense to view them as a single cohesive unit rather than separate moments. W-H-O-A-R-E-I-O-U. Each letter appears with a rhythmic, almost algorithmic pacing, building the question, who are you? My first instinct was to tie this to the classic Persona academic setting. I thought we were looking at white paper cutouts stuck to a blackboard, with those white lines just being chalk dust. But the more I looked at it, the less that made sense. Look closely at the letters. That slight bleed at the edges looks exactly like ink from a typewriter key striking paper. Case closed, right? Not quite. Because if it's a typewriter, that doesn't explain the glowing bloom effect or the dark background. Old typed documents are black ink on white paper, not the other way around. So what are we actually looking at? After going through a long list of very dry YouTube videos, it finally hit me. We are looking at microfiche. If you don't know what that is, microfiche are small, transparent plastic sheets used decades ago to record and preserve newspaper archives. Basically, the 70s equivalent of an USB drive. To read them, you slide the plastic sheet under a projector with a high-intensity lamp, which explains that glow around the letters, and the heavy micro-scratches on the dark plastic surface. This implies someone is digging through physical archives, hunting for long-lost information. The presence of such old technology, the chemical bath from earlier, and this archive hunting now, would lead you to believe that Persona 6 might be set in the past, perhaps in the late Showa era. However, we know from the official description that this isn't the case. While the game may take place in the present, it is being told through the lens of an investigation into the past. But while that official description shuts down that past setting theory, it leaves a much darker door wide open. Every Persona game deals with identity, but this framing feels different. It feels distinctly hostile. Instead of a journey of teenage self-discovery, this feels like an interrogation. Who are you? It's such a simple question. But in this context, what does it mean? And most importantly, who is doing the asking? While it's tempting to assume it's society pressuring our main cast, a theme we already heavily explored in Persona 5, I have a completely different read on this. Let's break down exactly what's on the screen. In a few frames, we see forearms pointing toward the right, in others, forearms pointing toward the left. Despite the rapid cuts and the shifting camera angles, the core composition is deliberately mirrored, and we aren't just looking at random hands. We see 8 distinct arms. Each has its own unique clothing, accessories, and design. They belong to 8 individuals. Then there is the color story. Out of those 8, 2 stand out. They are saturated in a striking red. This stylistic choice feels incredibly specific. Not only does it visually separate the 8 hands into 2 distinct factions, with a leader highlighted in red for each side, but those pointing fingers also feel highly accusatory. It looks exactly like a standoff. Those 8 individuals likely make up our main cast for Persona 6, which is a standard party size for the series. But in this context, it doesn't look like they are the ones being interrogated. Instead, they are the ones demanding the answers. But this leads us to a dangerous edge. Are all 8 of them pointing at a common external threat, demanding to know, who are you? Or, and this is the much more interesting option, are they pointing at each other? Are we looking at a unified team or 2 rival factions? To dig deeper into these possibilities, we are suddenly pulled back into the Darkroom. But something strange is happening here. What we are seeing isn't just one image, it's 2 different processes occurring simultaneously. One is technical and mechanical, the literal chemistry of the film, while the other is allegorical, a symbolic representation of the story's narrative. Let's look at the background first, because there isn't much room for interpretation regarding the development of the film. The chaotic fluid imagery we see across several frames represents the physical destruction of the film roll through 3 stages: physical destruction, color inversion, and high contrast crushing. We don't need to get too detailed with the chemistry here, but it's clear that this was orchestrated by a skilled technician. It requires a high degree of trial and error to achieve these specific results. In the final part of the sequence, the resulting image is spliced into vertical strips once again. You can actually tell these strips are hung up to dry because of the way the shadows are cast, and how the continuity of the patterns doesn't match perfectly throughout different frames, implying air is being blown onto them. But while this chemical madness is happening in the background, the foreground is dominated by the 2 red strands we saw earlier. At this point, it's obvious what they represent: the leaders of the opposing groups. The reason I call this an allegory is because how they interact. As these 2 distinct strands become closer and eventually entangle, they begin to resemble an enzyme, a biological catalyst. When these 2 strands fall together to form this enzyme shape, it represents the moment where 2 separate elements collide to trigger something volatile. This perfectly mirrors the standoff we just witnessed, and their entanglement is the spark that ignites some kind of event. Suddenly, seeing these 2 processes in the same sequence makes perfect sense. It creates a thematic juxtaposition. The cold mechanical reality of chemical film processing contrasted against the poetic allegorical symbol of a biological spark. Now, this idea. two opposing forces uniting, opens up some massive narrative doors. In fact, I have a few theories about where this can go. Seeing how everything related to analog photography is so prevalent in this teaser, what if the core theme of Persona 6 revolves around negatives? In this context, we aren't just talking about film negatives, but about the concept of negation, the things that are hidden, the shadows, and the parts of ourselves we suppressed or cast aside just to fit into society. This concept would perfectly translate into the Arcana system, because the Fool's Journey represents the full spectrum of human experience. Many cards act as mirrors or direct opposites to one another to maintain a cosmic balance. Perhaps in this game, the Fool and the World, traditionally linked, are split between two different characters. This would break the established patterns of previous entries. It suggests that the journey isn't complete until these two opposites unite. Or, taking it a step further, it means that certain arcana must now fuse with their opposites to reach a final form. This explains why we saw such aggressive imagery of groups standing on opposite sides. It makes me believe that they are the antithesis of one another. They are mirror images, perhaps even existing in mirrored realities. For one to become whole, the other must be present as the counterbalance, which wouldn't be out of the question for a game in this series. But if we take this logic and we dial it up a little bit, we cross over into full crack theory territory. And oh boy, do I have a crazy one for you. Remember how we know from the official description that the game takes place in modern Japan? But what if that is only half the truth? Let's take this one step further and explore a more radical possibility. What if these two groups aren't just separated by space, but by time? What if the timeline is split, one group existing in the past and the other in the present, and they are using asymmetrical communication to reach one another across time? If we look at it this way, suddenly the heavy use of old analog technology and microfiche makes perfect sense. It isn't just an aesthetic choice for a retro feel anymore, but a necessity for communication across time. The present-day group is reading messages intentionally left for them decades ago, creating a loop of retro causality. A temporal push and pull. In this scenario, the question "who are you?" is no longer a hostile interrogation. It is an honest, desperate attempt to figure out who are you collaborating with across time. While this might sound like crazy talk, remember that the ideation process for Persona must have started roughly at the same time as the massive cultural trend towards high-concept time-bending stories, such as the global success of Your Name. A narrative involving two groups trying to coordinate across the rift in time wouldn't be out of the blue for Atlus. Even the gameplay could reflect this. Imagine exploring the same city locations during different eras, where the urban layout has changed, or where certain dungeons only exist in one timeline but are accessible from the other. It turns the game into a puzzle of two halves trying to unite and trigger a resolution that saves both timelines. Now, let's be realistic. Is this actually likely? From a marketing standpoint, splitting the cast across different timelines creates a painful problem. Persona fans love seeing the crew hanging out together. Dividing them could make it harder to market the core ethos of the series. Plus, stories involving bootstrap paradoxes, where the past and the future are heavily linked, are notoriously difficult to execute without feeling clunky or convoluted. But hey, you miss 100% of the swings you don't take, right? And if anyone could plan a narrative like that from the get-go, it's Atlus. But even if we set aside the crack theory of split timelines, one thing remains certain: there are two groups and their meeting is intended to trigger something massive. And that leads us back to the ultimate question: who is orchestrating this? Who is pulling the strings behind the scenes to coordinate such an encounter of fate? And what happens when these two sides finally collide? If it wasn't already clear by this point, the next sequence reunites us with an old friend. Here, the camera pulls us back into the physical reality of his lens, only to allow our minds to wander across the boundary between mind and matter, between the conscious and the unconscious. This happens as we watch an overexposed, flickering sequence showing one of the most iconic symbols in the series, the blue butterfly. It exists in perfect harmony with the visual texture of the teaser. It flies, it sits, and then it takes flight again, only to fade away, becoming an abstraction as a sequence of the chemical development process we are so familiar with by now. There is a strange fluidity here between the boundaries of material reality. In one frame, the butterfly is a living being. In the next, it's an abstract representation of a butterfly. When did that transition happen? At what exact moment did it stop being a physical entity and became just an idea of one? In Jungian psychology, the butterfly is the ultimate symbol of transformation. When it appears in persona, it signals something specific, that the rigid walls of physical reality are breaking down. This creates just enough space for metaphysical influences to make their presence felt. Is Philemon taking the forefront once again, or is he sitting in the shadows, pulling strings and coordinating everything from behind the curtain, leaving the direct guidance to our old friends in the Velvet Room? One thing is for sure, they need all these moving pieces aligned to solve a problem that is far larger than any single character can face alone. While it's true that Atlus has revealed quite a lot in this teaser, it remains impossible to predict exactly what problem they are preparing for us. They have kept several crucial cards close to their chest, but not all of them. They thought they were being cheeky, hiding a single specific frame at the very end, just before the most important part, thinking nobody would be crazy enough to dissect the exact aesthetics of this game. While the film strip sits in the developer tray, slowly being corrupted and destroyed by chemicals, we get a split-second glimpse of a photograph, a utility pole taken from a low angle. You can see the main post, the intersecting wires, and in the background, the sky, all filled with colors that look distorted by the solarization process. This mirrors the spider lilies from the beginning of the teaser. I believe this may be one of the most significant frames in the entire video. This specific image appeals to a very particular sensibility known in certain parts of the internet as Denpa. Now, if you aren't familiar with that term, don't worry, neither was I before going down this rabbit hole. I only knew it looked exactly like certain types of anime. But long story short, it is an internet subculture centered around themes of isolation, technological paranoia, and the blurring lines between reality and digital perception. It brings to mind a specific aesthetic often associated with serial experiments lane, and I believe the photo from the teaser is a slightly modified version of this exact real-world image. Look at the shapes, they are identical. It wouldn't surprise me if it is literally the original photo with a few chemical filters thrown over it. But here is where it gets crazy. Remember our whole concept of the negatives we discussed earlier? It turns out there are two distinct contradictory flavors of Denpa, a dark, psychological and sterile version and a modern moe version which is hyper cute and chaotic. The photo in the trailer clearly belongs to the first category. I believe this is going to be the overarching visual and thematic aesthetic for Persona 6. Otherwise, why go through the trouble of inserting a nearly identical reference to a real-world source material? What makes this subgenre even more fascinating is its honest look at the darker side of human-technology integration. A theme dealing with these issues, screen addiction, parasocial relationships, burnout, and digital dissociation, it is incredibly relevant in our current era. The way this aligns with everything we've analyzed so far is almost perfect. It feels like a match made in heaven. In fact, it fits suspiciously well. But while adopting this specific aesthetic wouldn't be entirely out of left field for a series like Persona, the final element that ties everything in this teaser together absolutely is. In the final sequence, we are brought right back into the direct continuity of the opening. The film is processed in the exact same way, textured with noise and heavy film grain, until the logo is finally revealed. And it isn't a clean digital design, quite the contrary. There is a deliberate visual tension to it. It actually reminds me of the X-Files logo. The bleeding edges, the micro gaps, and the uneven application of the green ink make it look like a physical stamp pressed onto a classified case file. It visually reinforces the idea that the characters in this game are trying to solve a mystery. When we look back and look at everything together, the overall picture finally begins to emerge. We started with the physical reality of chemical film processing, moved into artistic techniques, explored Jungian psychological symbolism, theorized temporal displacement, broke down the aesthetics of an internet subculture, and finally ending with the physical texture of the logo. So, what do I think Persona 6 is actually going to be like? Every modern Persona entry centers on a collective identity. Persona 3 had a specialized extracurricular execution squad, Persona 4 had the investigation team, and Persona 5 had the Phantom Thieves. Based on our findings, we are likely looking at a group that investigates the occult or local urban legends. They are probably students at an art academy who are assigned to make a documentary. Or maybe they just formed an after-school club where they dabble in the paranormal. two groups getting together to deal with a fractured reality. I imagine they chase shadows that took over ordinary citizens, and their goal isn't simply to destroy, but to investigate them. They use cameras and artistic insights to place together the tragic history of the relentless shadows, solve the mystery causing their decay, and perform an exorcism to bring them peace. The rapid tilting of the logo also makes me think that the method of capturing these entities might involve a device or a tool used to trap and isolate them, a la Pokémon. But here is where everything clicks together perfectly, especially when you look at how the latest entries in the series use special mediums to expose the truth. Persona 4 was built around analog TV, Persona 5 was driven by smartphone apps. For Persona 6, the medium is clearly film and photography. Imagine navigating the real world with a camera, a device that allows you to see what others cannot. When the lens glitches, or when you adjust the focus to invert the image into a negative, the mundane world falls away. The real world is the positive print, but by inverting the lens into a negative, they can see the hidden shadows. Your social stats and progress might be even tied to the art of photography, learning to develop film, capturing specific frames, or using playback features to find clues in the past. In a meta sense, we may even see a world where an editor manipulates the layout of a dungeon by stitching different film rolls together to uncover hidden paths, and if all our theories hold true, it wouldn't be surprising at all to find that the Velvet Room has adopted a Darkroom aesthetic this time around. At this point, it's practically to be expected. Ultimately, based on everything we've seen, Persona 6 feels like it will be a raw, found footage style mystery viewed through the lens of young artists grappling with their place in a digital world. It is an angsty way to explore the modern relationship between humans and technology. It would be a phenomenal direction for the franchise. But what do you think? Did I miss something? Do these clues convince you that we're dealing with an art school department this time around? Let me know your theories in the comments. I would love to hear them.